Thank you, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to join our discussion today about environmental social governance matters and best practices. Today, I'll be covering the 2019 Annual General Meeting of Shareholder Preview, as well as the emerging best practices, and some of the voting stewardship guidelines that investors are trying to actively participate in. So I'm Tram. I'm a director of research at Glassdoor. So just another brief introduction. I know that's a Chinese introduction of Glassdoor, but just to give you a brief introduction of who we are. We are an independent governance analysis firm. We provide proxy voting advice, and we have a global client base of more than 1,300 institutions that collectively manage more than $35 trillion in assets. And Glassdoor empowers institutional investors to make voting decisions at more than 23,000 meetings a year by uncovering and assessing governance, business, legal, political, and accounting risks of companies across approximately 100 markets. Glassdoor is also a portfolio company of the Ontario Teacher Pension Plan Board and Alberta Investment Management Corp, two of the largest pension plan investors in the world. So I basically cover the Asian markets from San Francisco office. We also cover Asia from our Sydney office. And there are also other operation and client offices around the globe, such as in Limerick, Germany, London, as well as in pop-up office in Japan. So Glassdoor has been providing in-depth proxy research since 2005. Our research is based solely on publicly available information. But we believe engaging with company is an important means to enhance our analysis. This will enable us to provide better informed, more pragmatic research for our clients. And we also facilitate direct engagement through the web-based Miro platform. My colleague John Goya will be providing an introduction about Miro later this afternoon. So if anyone is interested, please join us in the second section. So that's basically what we do. If you have any question about Glassdoor, please feel free to stop by and during the event, to stop by and catch me during the event. So let's cover about 2019 Annual General Meeting season, what we are expecting this year. Before we do that, let's take a look back to the 2018 proxy season. It was a momentous year. 2018, we observed a growing emphasis on investor stewardship as a global phenomenon. With the proliferation of investor stewardship codes around the globe and the adoption of 100% e-voting here in Taiwan as well, earlier in the year. And all these milestones bring with it increased transparency for annual general meeting for shareholders in Taiwan as well as globally. Following that milestone, we have the new corporate governance roadmap by the Financial Supervisory Commissions. This roadmap also seeks to update and modernize the corporate governance framework applicable to Taiwanese capital markets. So all these changes don't just impact companies. As part of a push to encourage shareholder activism, these corporate governance roadmap also target local institutional investors and particularly banks and insurers, and trying to increase their attendance at shareholder meeting of company they invest in, which is very important to us. And later in the year, we also see the update of the company art here in Taiwan, which update the reporting duty to company. One of the amendments in the company art that draw a lot of controversial discussion is the Article 173 that state that who own more than 50% stake in a company for no more than 3 months are eligible to convene a special meeting. This is very controversial. Some things that it could trigger a fight over the rights of the company, possibly encourage influx of Chinese investors, attempt for control. But some also believe this will help lessen the grip held by long-term serving board members in a company. So that basically sums up the regulatory update looking back at 2018. Next, I want to introduce you about what we think is our best practice trends and what Glassdoor does in order to enhance those trends. We note that for 2019, matters such as gender equality, board oversight, and skills were frequently front-page news and front of mind of many investors. The frequency and sophistication of conversation surrounding environmental, social, and governance issues grew substantially in the past few years. This will enable us to have a more contextual reading of the public disclosure this proxy seasons. And increased engagement will also likely result in improved proxy disclosure. As company identified 2019 proxy seasons, investors will remain focused on these key topics. We have board gender diversity and compositions, environmental and social risk oversight. I will start out with how Glassdoor incorporate these trends and best practice into our key policy guidelines, and what's our update for Taiwan in 2019. So as more evidence of the positive effect of increased gender diversity in the boardroom is accumulated, many investors have instituted new proxy voting policies and engaged companies with the goal of making boardroom more diverse. Studies have presented empirical evidence that board diversity can be beneficial to corporate financial and governance performance, and that high levels of board diversity may even have a positive impact on society as a whole. While some studies alternatively suggested that higher level of gender diversity may have a negative or neutral impact. So what is clearly evident is that board gender diversity is becoming increasingly hot topic for investors. And this is one of the topics that all companies should be prepared to address, especially during engagement efforts. Women are rising to highest level of government in many countries, advancing to executive ranks at top corporations, picking up more undergraduate as well as advanced degrees than men. Women employment rates held up better than men in the years following the recessions. And in 2015, a record number of women were on the top list of world billionaires. Despite all these successes, there's still a dearth of female directors on board of public companies around the world. So some countries like France and Norway are placing trial for board gender diversity, but most have a long way to go. Board gender diversity varies significantly by country. So in 2014, a report by Credit Suisse that compared percentage of women on board in 43 countries found that in 2013, estimates range as high as 39.7% in Norway to as low as 1.6% in Japan. So countries that had greater than 25% women on board are the countries that are listed here. We have Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and France. And also we have countries with less than 5% women on board, which include Japan, Pakistan, South Korea, and Taiwan. Moreover, regulatory development will impact board gender diversity by a whole lot of amounts. In recent years, we have a study that conducted and know that why Germany introduced quota requiring major companies to allot 30% of board seats to women. And these studies show out that by introducing voluntary quotas and regulatory update and scrutiny from authority, the markets seem to perform better. Anyways, diversity on the board is also seen as a key to ensuring that a company is able to reach all segments of its markets. So not just from recent years, but over the past several years, many countries have instituted various forms of regulation and guidelines in order to bring higher levels of female representation on public company board. While Taiwan has comparatively better improvement in its board gender diversity to other Asian countries, we still have a long way to go here. And we only have 3.5 increase in women representation on the boards in 2015. We urged authority to have a stronger stand, and we definitely recognize that changing the composition of a board may be a very long and complicated process for many countries as well. However, we also know that the composition of board, including gender diversity, can be relatively progressed by having adopt some regulation and quotas. So overall, in 2019, for Taiwan companies specifically, regarding gender diversity, we will not be making any recommendations in our voting recommendations solely based on the diversity of the board. Rather, it will be one of many considerations we make when evaluating company oversight structure. And looking further ahead in 2020, depending on other factors, including the size of the company or the industry in which the company operates in, and the governance profile of the company, we may extend to recommend voting against members of the board who has no female members. When making these voting recommendations to our shareholder, we will carefully review a company disclosure, especially for its diversity considerations. And we may refrain from recommending shareholders to vote against director of the board, which have provided a sufficient disclosure. So the key point here is more disclosure about how you are handling the gender diversity at your company. Another key focal point of shareholder when analyzing the corporate governance of their invested company is very related to the board as well, because after all, board member are direct representation of shareholder. So the second point will be the composition of the board. Skill, experience, diversity, and independence, those are the key points. It is common practice in most developed capital markets for nominee to board to stand for an uncontested election as well. And we basically look at these key points I just mentioned to determine how to recommend shareholder voting for or against particular director. So the question we try to answer is, how is the candidate chosen? What in particular does he or she bring to the board? How would the appointment fit into the company's strategic planning? And until recently, prevailing practice across most markets has been the provision of just bio information on the directors and the board nominees in a format largely limited to a brief career history of a list of current members. And I'm aware that in Taiwan, some will only just discuss about which companies that the director represents instead of the skills that the board have, the diversity that the board member brings. So this information is very important to shareholders as well as anyone who participates in the capital market to make informed decisions about how to elect the director for a board. And recently, we also note that there are 3 common practices in most developed countries, most of the developed capital markets have 3 common approaches to disclose board skills in order to give shareholder a better context of the director elections. And here are the 3 common approaches that we have been seeing in other markets. The first one on the left-hand corner is the board skill matrix. For this board skill matrix, this is commonly seen in Australian company, but there are rising interest in adopting this approaches in disclosing director nominees, especially in the United States. Companies following this first method often also incorporate further information on the skills and experience chosen to give market participants a better understanding of how these were attributed to director. Glassdoor generally consider this approach to be the most informative for market participants, but there are pros and cons. We also accept that this kind of public disclosure from the board that indicates the director is missing some metrics or certain skills could be potentially cause for conflicts. So in some countries, like in Australia Stock Exchange Corporate Governance Council state that disclosure need only be made collectively across the board as a whole without identifying the presence of absence of particular skill by particular director. So that is the cons of the first approach. And that leads us to the second approach, where we call the half matrix. For the half matrix, both skill and experience have been portrayed in a graph, like a stack bar graph. And there are also pros and cons in this approach. So the good thing is, for this kind of demonstration, the board clearly outlines which skills and experience are considered of particular importance for its composition, and to what level the board has assessed this as being represented, without too explicitly disclosing which directors. And it is believed to be a better approach from the first one, as in they disclose less, but still sufficient. And we see this common approach have been gradually adopted in the UK. So lastly, the third common variant here we have is the key skill and asset method. The key skill and asset method. In this common variant, the board neither provide the name nor the numbers of directors that are judged to possess each area of expertise. However, the description provided generally contains information on the method in which directors are set. So this is not clear, like audience of this kind of approach doesn't clearly know how many directors or how much experience the board is in certain skills, but it kind of gives us a layout of the level of importance, what area of expertise that the board refer for the companies. So those are the 3 common approaches in some of the developed capital markets. And like I just mentioned, it's important for company to recognize how investors are assessing the board compositions in order to make better informed judgment to the election of directors. In 2019, we are not making any voting, Glassdoor is not making any voting recommendations regarding board compositions, but we really urge companies and also as well as authority to take a closer look at the issue of board compositions, try to have better disclosure regarding this topic as it's becoming such a hot topic in the capital markets. So our last topic of discussion today is regarding the environmental and social risk oversight. In our policy guidelines in 2019, we have codified our approach to review how boards are overseeing environmental and social issues. So, for large cap company and in instances where we identify material oversight issue, Glasswitch will review a company overall governance practices and identify which director for board levels for large company, we identify a material oversight issue and then which director have been charged with any oversight or environmental social issue. We will note that in those instances and which have not clearly defined by company in their governance documents. Further, we also clarify that in instances where it is clear that companies have not properly managed or mitigate environmental or social risks to the detriment of shareholder value, Glasswitch may recommend that shareholders vote against members of the board who are responsible for oversight of environmental and social risks. In making these determinations, Glasswitch will carefully review the situation, its effect on shareholder value, as well as corrective action or other responses made by the company. So those are our best guideline update and the emerging best practice approaching in 2019. For our specific guideline, including a summary of relevant annual update, it is available also for public review on our website. So lastly, I want to touch on the topic of engaging from shareholder perspective with companies and how Glassdoors help investors in achieving the goal of engagement. So all companies, our investors and institutions try to make efforts to engage in accordance with the stewardship guidelines. So Glassdoors believe that having a detailed voting policy that is subject to review and revisions help institutional investors to exercise voting right in a consistent and strategic manner. And for this policy, we update annually in response for corporate governance developments in consultation with the Glassdoors Research Advisory Council. One second. So this is how we form our policy guidelines, the process involved, and the party involved. So the Research Advisory Council that we have is an independent external group of prominent industry experts to ensure that Glassdoors proxy voting policy are comprehensive, well-reasoned, and reflective of current global governance. The Research Advisory Council is comprised of many members, that are experts in legal, finance, law, management, investment, and accounting, including former Comptroller General of the U.S., Professor of Law at Harvard Law School, and other experts in the fields. So after consulting with the Research Advisory Council, we will also engage with industry experts, global authority for regulatory update, and especially issuer engagement. Overall, Glassdoors take a case-by-case approach in analyzing company and doing our policy guideline. So those are what we do in accordance with the stewardship guideline. We also develop our guideline depend on how engagement turn out with different parties. And as we know that dialogue between public companies and institutional investors also involved largely in 2018, engagement had become a very essential component for investor stewardship and public company accountability. Why Glassdoors welcome any engagement opportunities with issuers to foster mutual understanding? We try to avoid any closed-door meeting. by not having any meeting during our solicitation period, which is from the day that the notice meeting is released until the meeting ended. This policy is strictly enforced to ensure the independence of our research and to avoid any possible perception. We have been empowered to negotiate corporate governance. We emphasize that our research and advice can only be based on information on behalf of our clients. And because of that, we always make our policy guidelines and information public. So why Taiwan corporate governance regime lacks international best practice in certain respects? Last year, I believe, was a host to encourage science or progress. Over the past years, female representation on Chinese or Taiwanese board continue to improve. We look forward to a very encouraging 2019 seasons. So that basically concludes my share with you today about 2019 annual general meetings of shareholder preview and the emerging best practice. Thank you everyone for your attention. And if you have any question, we will have a panel later this afternoon, and we have an open forum for that if you have any question that you want to raise. Thank you again.